The Chico History Museum is located in Chico, California, a college town in Northern California with a population of just over 100,000 people. Being a history museum focused on and in a large town, the Chico History Museum portrays how museums can communicate the stories of society. The museum was first established in 1986 as the Chico Museum. In 2018, they changed management, name, and focus and became the Chico History Museum. The museum is housed in Chico's beautiful old Carnegie Library, which the museum's treasurer, Debbie Rickey, says is leased from the city for $1. Despite a lack of much of a personal collection, the museum has been growing its permanent displays. These displays include Chico's Chinese temple, a Native American exhibit, and a timeline of the history of Chico displayed in a custom-made museum cabinet. Currently, besides their exhibits and displays, the museum also runs a number of lectures throughout the year on a variety of topics about the history of their community. Attendees of the lectures are charged $10. The museum itself has a suggested admission for adults of $5. The museum is housed in the amazing old Chico Carnegie Library building, which was one of 4 Carnegie libraries built in Butte County. The library building was originally designed by Stone and Smith of San Francisco in the Romanesque style and was completed in 1905. Just 34 years later, it was decided to remodel the building to a more modern Mediterranean style with a red tile roof and decorative tiles, which made the building look quite different. The county's library was moved to a new building in 1984, and the old Carnegie Library was leased to the fledgling Chico Museum in 1986. The Chico Museum, which was managed by the Far West Heritage Association starting in the mid-1990s, did not have much in the way of a permanent collection. Thus, 2/3 of their exhibits were created from the ground up, mostly on loan from community members, and they also made extensive use of traveling exhibits. In early 2018, the name was changed to the Chico History Museum, coinciding with the board of directors' decision to break away from Far West due to a number of growing issues. These mostly were attributed to a belief that Far West was giving priority to projects and ideas for the larger Patrick Ranch Museum, which they also managed. In addition, most of the association's board of directors had their focus and knowledge rooted in agriculture. Definitely, the members of the Chico Museum's board seemed to feel that the stories, narratives, and even the beauty of Chico were being supplanted by the more capitalist approach of the Far West Heritage Association. I got the chance to interview Debbie Rickey, who is the treasurer and a member of the museum's board. She has been with the museum since 2015, when she first became part of the steering committee. She was there in 2018 when the members of the board made the decision to break with Far West and run the museum independently. She remembers it was a hectic time as they worked to get all the paperwork through on a deadline. One memorable occasion was when she called U.S. Representative Congressman Doug LaMalfa's office, and with his help they were able to get their 501c3 in less than a week. The inner museum includes governance of the museum, which is through what Lord & Lord designated as a non-profit or charitable organization. To do this, the board created a non-profit business, and as Lord & Lord say is the case, the museum is actually run by the board, which has ranged from 7 to 10 people, each with different skills and talents. So, with a break from Far West, the newly named Chico History Museum established themselves with their own nonprofit status, as well as signing their own lease with the city for the museum building. Now they could begin the community focus necessary to communicate the narratives and history that they long to learn and tell about Chico. I had not fully realized until I was talking with Debbie that this change happened only 4 years ago. And for almost a year of that time, they had been closed due to COVID-19 restrictions. This has affected many of their plans, but despite this, Debbie says they are really happy they made the change. One problem, though, is funding. Due to this, they've only intermittently had directors since the change. And their last director, they could only pay him to work 1 day a week. This is a museum where volunteers are very important, as they do everything. Van Hoven and Wellman say that volunteers will prove to be one of the more valuable resources a museum can have. But here, I think I might go even further and say they are the most valuable resource of this museum. It is interesting that the board felt the need to also firmly change the museum from a more general museum to what Latham & Simons would classify as a history museum, solidly focused on its geographical region. Along with the change in name and management, the museum came up with a new mission statement, which ideally would direct the focus of everything in the internal system that makes up the museum. The mission is to acquire, conserve, research, and communicate the rich history of Chico for the education and enjoyment of the community. Interestingly, even though they are not accredited, their new mission statement refers to most of the functions that Latham & Simons lists as being common for most museums to have. This mission makes complete sense as the museum is curated by local historians and collectors who love Chico and its rich history. Debbie talked a bit about one of these historians, whose name is Randy. Not only is he on the board, but many of the items on display that aren't owned by the museum are on loan from Randy. It is also because of his influence that Debbie chose to give her time to the museum when she retired. Debbie feels that they've been making good progress toward what the board wants the museum to be, despite the delays and problems brought about by COVID-19. The museum and its exhibits are now firmly focused on Chico's history, and the community is showing itself ready to be called upon to help create and populate exhibits. They of course hope to one day have the money to once again hire a manager full-time, but are not sure when that will be. Similarly, they have started the process of digitizing the collection management on their exhibits. They acquired the software Past Perfect, but need to finish inputting all their items into it. Currently, most items are still on cards. Debbie told me that unfortunately the person who knew the system best left, and they have not yet replaced her. She also says that they need to go through their collection and determine which items are actually from Chico and its history, so as to know which ones they want to keep. This is all part of the programmatic research that is typical for museums, where items are identified, authenticated, and described as they are cataloged. It is a sure bet that the Chico History Museum, like most other museums today and into the future, will have to find ways to be creative with obtaining funding if they want to thrive. However, I believe they also currently have one of the chief aspects that Latham & Simons have said is required for a healthy museum, which is constantly being in the process of redefining who they are and what they do. The museum is open 4 days a week from Thursday to Sunday for 5 hours each day. When I visited the museum in 2022, we were immediately approached by Jim, who volunteers as a docent. He was very knowledgeable and escorted us around most of the museum. The museum itself has 2 galleries with a small entrance hall in between, which also houses the concierge desk and a shelf displaying their gift shop offerings. Here you'll also see the only windows in the building, as Jim explained that the rest were covered over when the building was retrofit for the museum. To the right is the smaller Carnegie gallery. Here you'll see Chico's Chinese temple, which was brought to Chico by the Chinese in 1884. The Chinese thrived for a time in Chico despite facing discrimination and violence. However, Jim said the temple was ultimately left behind in a white friend's barn when the last Chinese left the area in 1939. The temple has been housed in the museum since it first opened in 1986. This gallery also contains information on John Bidwell, one of the founding fathers of the area, who served in Congress at the time of Lincoln and was instrumental in getting the first North State California College built in Chico. To the left of the entrance hall is the larger Patrick Gallery, named after Hester Patrick, who left a legacy to the museum when she died in 2001. Here you see a few vestiges of the inner museum with a tiny office area on one edge, as well as a gated staircase to the basement, which Debbie says houses more of their collection, including the remaining pieces of the Chinese temple. The Patrick Gallery contains a number of exhibits that, according to Debbie and Jim, slowly get changed out over time. Here, among other things, we saw a small display for Lee Pharmacy, including their antique scale, which I felt compelled to try out. a permanent local Native American display of baskets and grinding stones, pictures, videos, and even a bench made out of the old hooker oak, a famous large tree from the area that fell in 1977, a vintage map display, and even a small schoolroom set up with antique desks. Debbie says that all of these items came from Chico. In all of these exhibits, you can see the narrative building that is truly possible when a museum chooses to focus on communicating the stories of society. Interestingly, although most of their exhibits are firmly based around objects, the exhibit on the hooker oak is instead firmly based on the story of the absence of an object, the tree which is now gone. This is also an interesting portrayal of the divergent ways Gurian shows that museums can take towards objects. Throughout, you'll also see that most of the exhibits have multiple points of entry. They have objects, images, text, and videos. Most of the video screens were small, tablet-sized, but at least 3 were larger than my TV at home. Latham and Simons explain how many museums are changing exhibits in these ways, and thus are creating feedback in the holistic system between the internal and external systems. And if you're looking, you'll also notice modern aspects such as security cameras and a metal grid attached just below the ceiling joist for added lighting. Throughout the museum, I notice a number of the visitors' Bill of Rights being seen to as well. The bathrooms are easy to access right inside the entryway. The staff and docents were extremely welcoming. Communication with the docent went both ways, and there were many chairs and benches throughout for the tired, or even just to relax while watching a video. In addition, they had dedicated handicapped access. This was added back in 2001 when work was done to bring the building up to code for ADA standards by adding an elevator for handicap access. Before this retrofit, access for anyone with disabilities was fairly difficult as the main entrance is reached by a staircase with over 15 steps. The inside access to the elevator is located at the far end of the Patrick Gallery. However, you'll notice from this image that the outside access is currently located between a couple of dumpsters, which I don't feel is really ideal. The Chico History Museum is also firmly part of its external community system. The museum benefits from its placement just 1 block from the university. According to Debbie, they not only benefit from class projects, such as one of their current videos on Chico in the 60s, and students in search of internships, but they also get a large percentage of their visitors from people visiting the university. In addition, due to being located in the center of town, the museum, unlike many of the museum temples that Dana complained about, is placed so the community at large can easily visit it. Debbie also expounded on how important it is to have a working relationship with various organizations, from the city from whom they lease the building, to the college which is next door, to the local horticulture society who take care of the plantings outside, or even the Chico Heritage Association with whom they have partnered at times. The Chico History Museum is in itself a community story. It is the narrative of a group of people who longed for an active connection to their city, and one day, when it looked like they might lose the museum that they hoped would be the vessel to tell Chico's stories, they decided to fight to take it back. Today, the Chico History Museum does its part every day to make sure that the stories of the history of Chico are remembered and told.